The dust on the horizon gave way to another empty day as Delilah Warren clutched the worn envelope in her hand, her gaze fixed on the endless Wyoming prairie where she had come to wait once more. 5 years of letters sent, 5 years of silence returned, yet something within her refused to surrender the hope that had brought her from Boston to this unforgiving frontier. The year was 1877, and the promise of the West had long since faded into the harsh reality of survival. Delilah's thin cotton dress fluttered in the prairie wind as she stood beside the weathered fence post that marked the boundary of what should have been their land, hers, and Samuel Donovan's. The man who had stolen her heart with poetry and promises before the war called him away. "Miss Warren, you're out here again?" Martha Jenkins' voice carried across the yard from the modest boarding house where Delilah had taken residence these past 6 months. "Just for a while longer," Delilah called back, her eyes never leaving the horizon. The setting sun painted the grasslands in amber hues, transforming the ordinary into something magical, the way Sam had once described it in his letters. "Supper will be cold if you wait much longer, and Mr. Jenkins says there's a storm brewing." Martha's concern was genuine, but Delilah had grown accustomed to the warnings about the weather, about her reputation as the strange Eastern woman who watched the horizon, about the futility of her wait. With a sigh, Delilah tucked the letter into her pocket. 5 years ago, Samuel had written of coming back to claim the land he had staked before joining the Union Army. 5 years ago, she had made the decision to follow him west when her replies went unanswered. Now, at 23, the youngest teacher at Clearwater's modest schoolhouse, she had built a life of sorts, but not the one she had dreamed of. "Coming, Martha," she replied, her fingers lingering on the fence post one moment longer. The boarding house was warm and filled with the aroma of Martha's stew. The other boarders, mostly unmarried men working at the sawmill or the mercantile, nodded respectfully as Delilah entered. She had earned their respect through her quiet dignity, though she knew they whispered about her past. "Mail came while you were out teaching today," Martha said, sliding an envelope across the table after Delilah had taken her seat. Delilah's heart leapt, then settled when she recognized her sister's handwriting. Not from Sam, never from Sam, but welcome nonetheless. "Thank you," she murmured, tucking it away to read in the privacy of her room later. "There's also talk of a cattle drive coming through," Mr. Jenkins offered between spoonfuls of stew. "Might bring some business to town. Lord knows we need it after that harsh winter." Delilah nodded politely, though her thoughts drifted. A cattle drive meant cowboys, and every time riders came through Clearwater, she found herself searching for Sam's face among them. It was a foolish habit, one she tried to break, but hope was a stubborn companion. Later, in her small room, Delilah lit a lamp and opened her sister's letter. Diana wrote of Boston, of their parents' good health, of suitors Delilah might consider if she would only come home. The final paragraph made her pause. "I have made inquiries as you requested," Diana wrote. "A Samuel Donovan did indeed survive the war, according to Army records. His last known whereabouts were in Colorado Territory in 1873. I wish you would abandon this pursuit, dear sister. Whatever promises were made have surely expired with time." Delilah's fingers trembled as she folded the letter. Alive. Sam was alive, at least as of 4 years ago. The knowledge both comforted and wounded her. If he lived, why had he never written back? Why had he abandoned their plans? She pulled out her small wooden box, where she kept his letters, 12 in all, rereading the final one by lamplight. "When this war ends, I'll stake our claim in Wyoming Territory, where the land stretches wider than you can imagine. Wait for my word, Delilah. I'll send for you when I've built something worthy of the woman you are." Something worthy. Perhaps he had decided she was too refined for frontier life. Perhaps he had found another. Perhaps the land had broken him as it had broken so many others. Delilah blew out the lamp and lay in darkness, listening to the wind rising outside her window. Tomorrow she would teach her students about geography and arithmetic, and she would not stand at the fence watching for phantoms. But her dreams betrayed her resolve, filled with Sam's face as she remembered it, strong jaw, eyes the color of the ocean she had crossed with her family as a child, and a smile that had once promised her everything. Morning brought no relief from Delilah's restlessness. The cattle drive Mr. Jenkins had mentioned was apparently drawing nearer, as riders had been spotted scouting the area. The town buzzed with anticipation for the business it would bring. "Miss Warren, you seem distracted today," observed Elijah Moore, a bright 10-year-old with a talent for mathematics. Delilah smiled apologetically at her class of 12 students, ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. "You're right, Elijah. Let's focus on our geography lesson. Who can tell me which territories border Wyoming?" As the children recited their answers, Delilah's gaze drifted to the window. Dust clouds rose in the distance, riders approaching. Her heart performed its usual hopeful lurch before she forced it to settle. When school dismissed, Delilah lingered, correcting arithmetic assignments until the building was quiet. The sound of horses and cattle was more distinct now, and she knew the drive must be passing near town. Part of her wanted to hurry back to the boarding house and avoid the commotion altogether. Another part, the foolish, hopeful part, wanted to stand at that fence post once more. The foolish part won. Gathering her shawl around her shoulders, Delilah walked the familiar path to the edge of town, where the land she believed Sam had claimed began. The fence was a simple affair, just posts with wire strung between them, marking where Clearwater ended and the open range began. She stood there, one hand on the weathered wood, watching as cowboys guided cattle in the distance. They were still too far to make out faces, but the scene was beautiful in its way, a painting of the West that artists back east tried to capture but never quite managed. "Excuse me, madam," a voice called from behind her. "Is this Clearwater?" Delilah turned to find a man on horseback, trail dust covering his clothes and hat. He wasn't Sam, she knew that immediately, but something in his eyes held kindness. "Yes," she replied. "The main street is just behind me. You'll find the general store and saloon there." The man nodded his thanks, then hesitated. "If you don't mind my asking, what are you doing out here alone?" Delilah straightened, accustomed to defending her solitary habits. "I'm waiting for someone." "Out here? At the edge of town?" "This is where he'll look for me," she said, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. The rider studied her with curiosity. "Must be someone special to have you waiting at a fence post." "He is." Delilah turned back toward the horizon. Or was. The rider removed his hat, revealing sandy hair and a weathered face that had seen perhaps 30 years. "Name's Daniel Ross. I'm scouting ahead for the Rocking D outfit." "Delilah Warren," she offered, not particularly wanting conversation, but bound by the politeness ingrained since childhood. "Well, Miss Warren, whoever you're waiting for is a fortunate man." Daniel Ross replaced his hat. "Though, if he's keeping a lady like you waiting at fence posts, he might not deserve that fortune." With that, he tipped his hat and rode toward town, leaving Delilah to her vigil. His words echoed in her mind. Was she the foolish one, clinging to promises made before war changed everything? Or was there still reason in her wait? As twilight descended, Delilah reluctantly turned back toward the boarding house. The cattle drive had made camp outside town, and Clearwater hummed with unusual activity. Cowboys filled the saloon, their raucous laughter spilling into the street. Others visited the general store for supplies or sought the services of the town's barber. Delilah kept her head down, hurrying past groups of trail-weary men. She had nearly reached the boarding house when a voice stopped her, not Sam's, but the scout from earlier. "Miss Warren," Daniel Ross called, jogging to catch up with her. "Found yourself a better waiting spot?" Despite herself, Delilah smiled. "Just returning home for the evening, Mr. Ross." "Home? So, you're not just passing through Clearwater? I've been teaching at the school for the past 6 months." Daniel nodded, falling into step beside her. "That explains why the children I saw seemed better behaved than most. Good teacher, I expect." "I try to be," Delilah said, uncertain why she was continuing this conversation. Perhaps it was simply the novelty of speaking with someone new, someone who didn't know her story. "Our trail boss was hoping to speak with the school teacher, actually. We've got a young boy traveling with us orphaned along the way. His mother was our cook, but fever took her near Laramie. We've been looking after him, but it's no life for a child." Delilah's heart softened at the story. "How old is he?" 8, maybe 9. Smart little fellow, but he needs stability. Schooling. "Has anyone in town offered to take him in?" She knew the answer before he spoke. Clearwater was not unkind, but resources were limited, and another mouth to feed was a significant commitment. Daniel shook his head. We were hoping you might know of a family, or perhaps the town has some arrangement for such situations. They had reached the boarding house steps. Delilah paused, considering. Bring him to the school tomorrow. I'll speak with him and see what might be arranged. Relief washed over Daniel's face. Thank you, Miss Warren. That's mighty kind. As Delilah prepared for bed that night, she found herself thinking not of Sam, but of the orphaned boy traveling with rough cowboys. Her own situation suddenly seemed less desperate by comparison. She had chosen to come west, had secured employment, had created a life that, while not what she had planned, was still hers to shape. Morning brought a knock at the schoolhouse door before classes began. Daniel stood there with a small, solemn-faced boy, whose clothes had been hastily brushed clean of trail dust. Miss Warren, this is Thomas, Daniel said, his hand resting protectively on the boy's shoulder. Thomas, Miss Warren is the teacher here. The boy looked up with eyes that had seen too much for his years. Madam, he said quietly. Hello, Thomas. Delilah knelt to his level. Would you like to join our class today? We're learning about rivers and mountains. Thomas glanced up at Daniel, who nodded encouragingly. Yes, madam, the boy replied. Excellent. We start in half an hour. There's a shelf with books in the corner if you'd like to look through them while we wait for the others. As Thomas cautiously approached the bookshelf, Delilah stepped outside with Daniel. How long can he stay in Clearwater? Daniel removed his hat, turning it in his hands. The drive moves on tomorrow. We can't keep him with us all the way to Montana. It's too dangerous, and he needs a proper home, Delilah finished for him. I understand. Let me speak with Reverend Halloway. The church sometimes coordinates such matters. I'd be grateful, Daniel said. We've all grown fond of the boy, but a cattle drive is no place for him. As he turned to leave, Delilah found herself asking, Will you be at the saloon tonight to hear what arrangements are made? Daniel's smile reached his eyes. I'll be there, Miss Warren, though I admit it's an unexpected place to meet a schoolteacher. These are unexpected circumstances, she replied, surprised by the warmth in her own voice. Throughout the day, Delilah observed Thomas. He was quiet but attentive, quick to learn and respectful to the other children. When she introduced him to the class, he stood straight and answered questions without hesitation. By lunchtime, he was playing marbles with Elijah Moore and 2 other boys. After school, Delilah took Thomas to meet with Reverend Halloway, who listened to the boy's story with compassion. The Millers have been praying for a child, the Reverend said thoughtfully. Their farm is just outside town, and they're good, God-fearing people. Would they consider taking Thomas? Delilah asked. I believe they would, at least to foster him while more permanent arrangements are considered. Let me speak with them this afternoon. Satisfied that progress was being made, Delilah walked Thomas back to where Daniel waited with the cattle drive. The boy seemed torn between excitement at the prospect of a real home and sadness at leaving the men who had cared for him since his mother's death. You'll visit before you leave tomorrow? Thomas asked Daniel. Count on it, partner. Daniel ruffled the boy's hair. I'll bring the whole crew to say goodbye properly. As Thomas ran off to help with evening chores, Daniel turned to Delilah. Thank you for this. I know it's not your burden to bear. Children are never burdens, she replied, and the Millers are good people, if they agree to take him. They lost a son to diphtheria 2 years ago. Daniel nodded, his expression solemn. Life out here takes as much as it gives. The words hung between them, and Delilah found herself thinking of Sam again. Had life in the West taken something from him, too? Something that prevented him from keeping his promises? The Reverend will let me know the Miller's decision this evening, Delilah said. I can bring word to the saloon, as we discussed. Daniel studied her face. You don't seem the type to frequent saloons, if you don't mind my saying. I'm not, she admitted, but I'm also not the delicate Eastern flower some in town believe me to be. This drew a genuine laugh from Daniel. I never thought you were, Miss Warren, not standing at that fence post with determination in your eyes. The mention of the fence brought Delilah back to reality. What was she doing? Arranging to meet this cowboy, this stranger at the saloon? Had she not come to Wyoming for Sam? I should go, she said abruptly. The Reverend will send word when he has news. Daniel's smile faded slightly, but he nodded. Of course. Thank you again, Miss Warren. As she walked back toward the boarding house, Delilah felt conflicted. For the first time in years, she had gone an entire day without dwelling on Samuel Donovan. The realization was both liberating and frightening. That evening, a note arrived from Reverend Halloway. The Millers had agreed to take Thomas, at least temporarily, with an understanding that they might eventually adopt him if the arrangement proved beneficial for all. Delilah stared at the note, knowing she should be pleased with this outcome. Yet the thought of delivering this news in person to Daniel stirred a mixture of emotions she wasn't prepared to confront. Going out again? Martha asked, as Delilah wrapped her shawl around her shoulders. Just to deliver a message regarding the orphaned boy with the cattle drive, Delilah explained. The Millers have agreed to take him in. Martha nodded approvingly. That's good news indeed. Those are fine people. The saloon was crowded and loud when Delilah entered, drawing curious stares from the patrons. She spotted Daniel at a table with several other cowboys, Thomas seated beside him with a mug of what appeared to be sarsaparilla. Daniel stood immediately when he saw her, removing his hat. Miss Warren, he said, pulling out a chair for her. This is unexpected. I have news, she said, nodding politely to the other men at the table. The Millers have agreed to take Thomas in. They have a farm just outside town with horses and chickens. Thomas's eyes widened. Real horses that I could ride? With permission and proper instruction, I imagine so. Delilah smiled. Mrs. Miller was a teacher before she married, so she can continue your lessons during the summer months. The boy looked both excited and afraid, a combination Delilah recognized all too well from her own arrival in Wyoming. When would I go to them? He asked. Tomorrow morning, Delilah replied. I can take you there myself if you'd like. Thomas nodded slowly, then looked up at Daniel. Will you come too? A shadow crossed Daniel's face. The drive moves on tomorrow, Thomas, but I'll see you settled before we leave. The boy's lower lip trembled, but he nodded bravely. One of the other cowboys, a burly man with a kind face, ruffled Thomas's hair. We'll write to you, boy, and maybe next year's drive will bring us through Clearwater again. Delilah watched the interaction with a tightness in her chest. These rough men had become a family to the orphaned child, and tomorrow they would ride away, leaving him behind just as Sam had ridden away from her, though under different circumstances. Would you like some tea, Miss Warren? Daniel asked, interrupting her thoughts. The saloon keeps some for the occasional lady visitor. No, thank you. I should be getting back. Delilah stood, suddenly feeling out of place among these trail-worn men. I'll walk you, Daniel said, grabbing his hat. To Thomas, he added, Be right back, partner. Don't let these scoundrels teach you any more card tricks while I'm gone. Outside, the night air was cool and clear, stars scattered across the vast Wyoming sky. Delilah took a deep breath, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease as they walked away from the saloon's noise. You've done a good thing for that boy, Daniel said after they had walked in silence for a moment. The Millers are the ones offering a home, Delilah replied. I simply made a connection. Still, not everyone would have taken an interest. Daniel glanced at her. May I ask you something personal, Miss Warren? Delilah hesitated, then nodded. Who are you waiting for at that fence post, if you don't mind telling? The question shouldn't have surprised her, yet it did. For so long, Sam had been a private wound she nursed, a secret hope she guarded. Someone who promised to return, she finally said. Someone who wrote letters full of plans for land and a home and a future together. And he never came back, Daniel concluded. His letters stopped during the war. I continued writing, but received no replies. 5 years ago, I decided to come west myself. To find him? To find what he had found or thought he had found in this territory. Delilah stopped walking, gazing up at the stars. My sister recently confirmed he survived the war. His last known whereabouts were in Colorado 4 years ago. Daniel was silent for a long moment. 5 years is a long time to hold on to hope, Miss Warren. Delilah, she corrected, surprising herself. And yes, I'm aware of how it appears to others. I meant no disrespect, Daniel said quickly. In fact, I find your loyalty admirable. This man must be quite extraordinary to inspire such devotion. He was, Delilah said, then corrected herself. He is, or at least the man I knew was. They had reached the boarding house. Daniel stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you again for helping with Thomas," he said. "It means a great deal to all of us." "I'm glad I could help." Delilah hesitated, then added, "Will you be leaving with the drive tomorrow?" "That's the plan," Daniel confirmed, "though I'd like to see Thomas settled with the Millers first." "Of course. I'll be taking him there around 9, after I've finished morning lessons." Daniel nodded. "I'll meet you at the schoolhouse." As he turned to leave, Delilah called after him, "Mr. Ross?" He looked back. "Daniel, please." "Daniel," she amended. "Thank you for not thinking me foolish for waiting." His smile was gentle in the moonlight. "Hope is never foolish, Delilah, though sometimes it needs to find a new direction." With that, he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Delilah to ponder his words as she prepared for bed. The following morning brought clear skies and the bustle of a cattle drive preparing to depart. Delilah conducted abbreviated lessons, her mind frequently wandering to the fence post where she had stood so many times. Would she stand there again tonight, watching for a man who had likely forgotten her years ago? When the children were dismissed, Thomas remained behind, his small bag of possessions clutched in his hands. "Will they like me?" he asked as they waited for Daniel. "The Millers?" "They'll adore you," Delilah assured him. "Mrs. Miller has been baking since dawn, I hear." Daniel arrived on horseback, another horse saddled and ready beside him. "Thought we might ride out to the Miller's place," he explained. "Thomas can show off his riding skills." The boy's face lit up as Daniel helped him mount. Delilah watched the easy way Daniel interacted with Thomas, noting the genuine affection between them. "There's room for you as well," Daniel said, gesturing to his own horse, "unless you prefer to walk the 3 miles. Delilah hesitated, then allowed Daniel to help her up behind him. It had been years since she'd ridden, and never with a cowboy. She placed her hands lightly on his waist, trying to maintain proper distance despite the horse's movement. "You'll fall off that way," Daniel warned. "Hold on properly. Delilah, I promise not to take advantage of the situation." Blushing, she tightened her grip as they set off toward the Miller farm, Thomas riding proudly beside them. The journey passed quickly, filled with Thomas's excited questions about farm life and Daniel's patient answers. Delilah found herself relaxing, enjoying the warmth of the sun and the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them. The Miller's farm was modest but well maintained, with a whitewashed house, a sturdy barn, and fields of spring wheat stretching behind. As they approached, a couple emerged from the house, James Miller, tall and broad-shouldered, and his wife Sarah, whose kind face broke into a warm smile at the sight of Thomas. Introductions were made, with Thomas standing straight and solemn as he greeted his new foster parents. Sarah Miller immediately took to the boy, showing him the kitchen where cookies awaited, while James discussed practical matters with Daniel. "He's had a hard journey," Daniel explained. "Lost his mother to fever. He's a good boy, though smart and eager to learn." James nodded understanding. "We'll care for him as our own. Sarah has prayed for another chance at motherhood since we lost our Robert." Delilah watched the interaction, struck by how smoothly the transition was progressing. Within an hour, Thomas had been shown his room, previously Robert's, and introduced to the farm animals. The boy's initial nervousness had given way to cautious excitement as Sarah promised to teach him to ride properly, and James spoke of building him a fishing pole. When it came time to leave, Thomas clung to Daniel briefly, fighting tears. "You'll really write to me?" he asked. "Every chance I get," Daniel promised. "And you write back, telling me about school and the farm." "I will," Thomas vowed, straightening his shoulders. "Thank you for taking care of me after Ma died." Daniel's eyes glistened as he ruffled the boy's hair one last time. "You take care of the Millers now, you hear? They need a strong boy like you." The ride back to town was quieter, both Delilah and Daniel lost in their thoughts. When they reached the schoolhouse, Daniel dismounted and helped Delilah down, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. "The drive leaves within the hour," he said, his expression unreadable. "Then you should go," Delilah replied, though something in her wished for a different outcome. Daniel nodded, then reached into his pocket and withdrew an envelope. "I have something for you," he said, handing it to her. Delilah looked at the envelope in confusion. Her name was written on the front in unfamiliar handwriting. "What is this?" "Open it when I'm gone," Daniel said. "It might answer some questions." Before she could respond, he He mounted his horse. "Goodbye, Delilah Warren. Thank you for helping Thomas." "Goodbye, Daniel," she replied, watching as he rode toward the cattle drive's encampment, the envelope clutched in her hand. Only when he was out of sight did she open it, finding a single sheet of paper inside. The message was brief. Samuel Donovan died in Colorado, 1873, mining accident. He spoke of a woman in Boston before he passed. I was with him. He asked me to find you if I ever traveled east. But fate brought you west instead. Forgive me for not telling you immediately. Some news should not be delivered by strangers. Daniel Ross. Delilah's legs gave way as she sank onto the schoolhouse steps, the letter trembling in her hands. Sam was gone. Had been gone for 4 years. The knowledge crashed over her in waves, grief for the man she had loved, anger at the wasted years of waiting, and a strange, guilty relief that her vigil had not been in vain. He hadn't abandoned her. Death had taken him instead. She read the note again, questions forming. Daniel had known Sam, had perhaps been his friend. Why hadn't he told her immediately? Why leave it in a note as he departed? Standing abruptly, Delilah gathered her skirts and began running toward the edge of town. The cattle drive would be moving out, and with it, the only connection to Sam she had found in 5 years of searching. The town was busy as cowboys made final purchases and settled accounts before departure. Delilah pushed through the crowd, ignoring the curious stares as she made her way to the fence post, where she had stood so many times before. From there, she could see the cattle drive beginning its slow movement northward. Cowboys rode alongside the herd, keeping the cattle in formation as they left Clearwater behind. "Daniel!" she called, though she knew her voice couldn't reach them. For a moment, Delilah considered running after them, demanding answers about Sam's final days. But what would that accomplish? Sam was gone, and no amount of details would bring him back. As the dust from the departing herd settled, Delilah remained at the fence post, her eyes fixed on the horizon. This time, however, her vigil felt different. The truth, painful as it was, had freed her from uncertainty. She stayed until sunset, saying a silent goodbye to Samuel Donovan and the dreams they had shared. Then, with one last look at the darkening horizon, she turned and walked back to town. Days passed, then weeks. Spring blossomed fully into summer, and Delilah found a new rhythm to her life. She visited Thomas at the Miller farm each Sunday after church, delighting in the boy's growing confidence and happiness. She wrote to her sister in Boston, sharing the truth about Sam and explaining her decision to remain in Wyoming. "I came here searching for a ghost," she wrote, "but I've found a community and purpose instead. The West has shaped me in ways I never anticipated, and I cannot imagine returning east now." Sometimes, in quiet moments, she would read Daniel's note again, wondering about his connection to Sam and why fate had brought him to Clearwater. Had it truly been coincidence, or something more? One warm July evening, Delilah sat on the boarding house porch, enjoying the cooler air as twilight approached. Martha brought out lemonade, commenting on the rider approaching from the north. "Probably bringing mail," the older woman observed, "though he's coming from the wrong direction for the regular post." Delilah watched idly as the horseman drew nearer, then sat up straighter, as something familiar in his posture caught her attention. When the rider turned onto the main street, she found herself standing, her heart beating faster. Daniel Ross dismounted in front of the boarding house, removing his hat as he approached the porch. He looked trail-worn, but somehow lighter than when she had last seen him. "Miss Warren," he said, his voice warm, "I hope I find you well." "Mr. Ross," she replied, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "The cattle drive. Reached Montana 2 weeks ago," he finished for her. "I stayed long enough to see the herd delivered, then turned south again." "You came back to Clearwater?" Delilah asked, her mind racing. Daniel climbed the porch steps, stopping a respectful distance from her. "I came back to see if a certain schoolteacher still waits at fence posts." "I don't," Delilah said softly. "Not anymore." Something like disappointment flashed across his face before he nodded understanding. "That's good. Moving forward is important. Why didn't you tell me about Sam when we first met?" The question had haunted her for weeks. Daniel sighed, leaning against the porch railing. "I wanted to, believe me, But how does a stranger tell a woman that the man she's been faithfully waiting for is gone? I needed to know you first, to find the right way. So you left it in a note as you rode away? There was no accusation in her tone, only curiosity. Cowardly, perhaps, he admitted. But I thought it might be easier for you to grieve privately, without me watching. Delilah considered this. You knew him well? Sam? We worked the same mining claim in Colorado for almost a year. Good man, solid, talked about a woman named Delilah from Boston, often enough that the other miners teased him. Daniel's expression softened with memory. He was saving to bring you west when the accident happened. Tears pricked at Delilah's eyes. Thank you for telling me that. They were silent for a moment, the evening sounds of Clearwater settling around them. Have you seen Thomas? Delilah finally asked. Daniel nodded, a smile breaking across his face. Just came from there. The boy's thriving. James is teaching him to farm, and Sarah says he's reading at a level well beyond his years. Your influence, no doubt, Delilah smiled. He talked about you constantly at first. And now? Now he talks about becoming a farmer like Mr. Miller, or perhaps a teacher like me. Delilah paused. Children adapt. They find new dreams when old ones are lost. And what about school teachers? Do they find new dreams too? Daniel asked, his eyes meeting hers directly. Delilah felt warmth rise to her cheeks. Sometimes, she admitted, though they proceed with caution. As they should. Daniel straightened. I've taken a job with the Rocking D outfit permanently. They're establishing a ranch about 10 miles from Clearwater. You're staying in the area? Delilah couldn't hide her surprise. Turns out driving cattle isn't what I want to do for the rest of my life. The owner offered me a position as foreman, overseeing the ranch operations. Daniel hesitated, then added, I'd be settled in one place, might even build a proper house eventually. The implication hung between them, neither quite ready to acknowledge it directly. That sounds like a fine opportunity, Delilah said carefully. It is. Daniel replaced his hat, preparing to leave. I start next week. Thought I might come into town for supplies regularly. Perhaps visit the school occasionally to tell the children about ranching. Delilah smiled at the transparent excuse. I'm sure they would enjoy that very much, Mr. Ross. Daniel, he corrected. And maybe, if it wouldn't be improper, I could call on you properly? Sunday dinner, perhaps? I'd like that, Delilah replied, her smile widening. Though you should know, I visit the Millers and Thomas every Sunday afternoon. Even better, Daniel said, relief evident in his voice. I'd like to keep up with the boy's progress. As he turned to go, Delilah called after him, Daniel? He looked back, eyebrows raised in question. Thank you for finding me, even if it wasn't the way Sam intended. His expression softened. Some journeys take unexpected paths, Delilah. I'm grateful ours crossed. Watching him ride toward the town's small hotel, Delilah felt a sense of possibility she hadn't experienced in years. She had come to Wyoming seeking one future and found another opening before her instead. There would be time to explore it, to proceed with the caution that wisdom and experience had taught her. Daniel Ross was not Samuel Donovan, and that was as it should be. New dreams required new foundations. True to his word, Daniel began calling on Delilah regularly that summer. Their Sunday visits to the Miller farm became a cherished routine, with Thomas proudly showing off new skills, each week a fish he had caught, a horse he had learned to ride alone, a difficult sum he had mastered. As autumn approached, Daniel invited Delilah to see the Rocking D ranch where he worked. The main house was still under construction, but the barn and bunkhouse were complete, and cattle grazed on the surrounding grasslands. The owner plans to winter in Denver, Daniel explained as they rode across the property. He's left me in charge until spring. It's beautiful land, Delilah observed, admiring the rolling hills that stretched toward distant mountains. Reminds me of what Sam described in his letters, Daniel said carefully, watching for her reaction. The open space, the possibility. They had reached a point where they could speak of Sam without pain, acknowledging his place in both their lives while moving forward together. He would have loved it here, Delilah agreed, though perhaps not the winters. He always complained of the cold. Daniel laughed. He certainly did. Wore more layers than any man I've known. They dismounted near a small creek, spreading a blanket for the picnic lunch Martha had packed. As they ate, Daniel spoke of his plans for the ranch and his hope that the owner might eventually sell him a portion of the land. "I've been saving," he explained, "not just from the cattle drive, but before that. The mining in Colorado paid well when we hit a good vein." "You're thinking of having your own ranch someday?" Delilah asked. "A man needs something of his own out here." Daniel looked at her directly. "Something worth building, worth staying for?" The implication was clear, and Delilah felt her heart quicken. They had been careful with their growing relationship, respectful of her past and the community's expectations. But the feelings between them had deepened over the months, impossible to deny. "Daniel," she began, unsure what to say next. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "I'm not asking for anything yet, Delilah. Just telling you my thoughts, my hopes. When the time comes, if it comes, I want you to know I'm planning for more than just myself." The sincerity in his eyes moved her deeply. This was no hasty promise made in the flush of new feelings, but a thoughtful consideration of their future. "I appreciate that," she said softly. "And I want you to know that I'm no longer waiting at fence posts. I'm looking forward instead." His smile was worth every mile she had traveled to reach Wyoming, every letter she had written without reply, every tear she had shed for Sam. Sometimes loss carved pathways to unexpected joy. Winter came early that year, blanketing Clearwater and the surrounding rangeland in deep snow by late November. School continued despite the weather, with Delilah and her pupils huddled around the pot-bellied stove in the one-room schoolhouse. Daniel visited town less frequently as the ranch demanded his constant attention. Cattle needed extra feeding during the harsh weather, and predators grew bolder as game became scarcer. When he did make it to Clearwater, his visits with Delilah were treasured respites from the isolation of ranch life. "I've received a letter from my sister," Delilah told him during one such visit in January. They sat in the boarding house parlor, a proper distance apart, as Martha worked on her mending nearby. "She's marrying in the spring and wants me to return to Boston for the wedding." Daniel's expression remained neutral, though his eyes betrayed concern. "Will you go?" "I'm considering it," Delilah admitted. "It would be good to see my family again." "Of course," he nodded, though tension had entered his shoulders. "When would you leave?" "April, most likely. The wedding is in May." Delilah studied his face. "It would only be for a visit, Daniel. My life is here now." The relief that washed over his features was palpable. "I'm glad to hear that," he said quietly. "Clearwater wouldn't be the same without its finest teacher." Martha coughed discreetly from her corner, reminding them of her presence. Daniel straightened, changing the subject to safer topics. The weather, Thomas's progress at school, the new shipment of books expected at the general store. When he left that evening, however, he pressed Delilah's hand longer than usual. "I'll see you Sunday," he promised, weather permitting. But Sunday brought a blizzard that confined everyone to their homes. February passed in a similar pattern of storms and brief clear spells, making travel between the ranch and town increasingly difficult. By early March, Delilah had not seen Daniel in nearly 3 weeks, the longest they had been apart since his return to Clearwater. His absence left an emptiness she hadn't expected, a testament to how thoroughly he had become part of her life. When the weather finally broke, Delilah was teaching arithmetic to her youngest students when the schoolhouse door opened. Daniel stood there, snow still dusting his coat and hat, his face reddened from the cold. "Mr. Ross," she said formally, though she couldn't keep the pleasure from her voice. "This is an unexpected visit." "Apologies for interrupting, Miss Warren," he replied with equal formality, though his eyes danced with private meaning. "I've brought something for your geography lesson." From his saddlebag, he produced a small rock specimen. "Quartz from the Colorado mines. Thought the children might find it interesting." The children gathered around eagerly as Daniel explained how quartz was formed and its value to miners. Delilah watched him with the class, noting how naturally he interacted with them, how patiently he answered their questions. When school dismissed for the day, Daniel lingered, helping Delilah stack books and straighten desks. The familiar routine they had established months ago resumed as if there had been no interruption. "I've missed you," he said simply when the last child had gone. "And I you," Delilah admitted. "The winter has felt particularly long this year." Daniel moved closer, taking her hands in his. I've been thinking about your trip to Boston. Yes? I'd like to give you something before you go. A reason to come back, beyond your students and your life here. His voice was steady, but she could feel a slight tremor in his hands. I love you, Delilah Warren. I think I have since I saw you waiting at that fence post, loyal to a memory, and braver than anyone I've known. Delilah's heart soared at the words she had suspected, but never heard directly. Daniel, let me finish, he said gently. I'm not asking for an answer today. I know you came west for another man, and I know part of your heart will always belong to Sam. I respect that. How could I not? When his memory brought you into my life. Tears pricked at Delilah's eyes as Daniel continued. When you go to Boston, I want you to go knowing that someone here loves you and is waiting for your return. Not at a fence post, he added with a smile, but wherever you need me to be. I love you too, Delilah whispered, the words coming easily, naturally. And I don't need time to know that. Daniel's face transformed with joy as he pulled her closer. Then, may I ask you properly, Delilah Warren, will you marry me? Not immediately, we can wait until after your sister's wedding, until you're certain, but someday? Yes, she replied without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you, Daniel Ross. His kiss was gentle, respectful of their surroundings, yet filled with promise. When they parted, both were smiling with the certainty of having found something rare and precious. I should tell you, Daniel said as they walked toward the boarding house. I've purchased land of my own. Just 100 acres, but good grazing land with a creek running through it. Your own ranch? Delilah asked, surprised. The beginnings of one. I've been negotiating with Mr. Davidson, the Rocking D owner, for months. The papers were finalized last week. That's wonderful news, Delilah exclaimed. But how? You said you were saving. I had more set aside than I let on, Daniel admitted. And Davidson offered fair terms. He's getting older, looking to reduce his holdings. They had reached the boarding house steps. Daniel took both her hands in his, suddenly serious. The land isn't much yet, just a small cabin and some fencing, but it's ours. If you want it, room to build something together. The word ours sent warmth through Delilah despite the March chill. I want it very much, she assured him. When April came and Delilah prepared for her journey east, the entire town knew of her engagement to Daniel Ross. Martha helped pack her trunk, offering motherly advice about weddings and marriage. Thomas, now firmly established with the Millers but a frequent visitor to town, presented her with a hand-carved wooden heart. Mr. Miller helped me make it, he explained proudly. For your wedding. It's beautiful, Thomas, Delilah said, embracing the boy. I'll treasure it always. Daniel accompanied her to Cheyenne, where she would catch the eastbound train. They had agreed she would return in June, and they would marry in July. Give your sister my congratulations, Daniel said as they waited for the train, and your parents my respect. I will, Delilah promised. Though they may be surprised to learn, I'm engaged to a rancher. Former cowboy, former miner, Daniel corrected with a grin. A man of diverse talents. Indeed, Delilah smiled up at him. One of whom is finding women waiting at fence posts. Daniel's expression grew tender. Only one woman, the only one who matters. As the train whistle sounded, they shared a lingering kiss, heedless of the other passengers watching. Then Delilah boarded, waving from the window as the train pulled away from the station. Daniel watched until the train disappeared from view, then mounted his horse for the journey back to Clearwater. He had a house to finish building and a future to prepare for. Boston was both familiar and strange to Delilah after nearly 2 years in Wyoming. The city's noise, its crowded streets, the formality of society all felt confining after the open spaces of the West. Her family welcomed her warmly, though they were clearly surprised by the changes in her. Delilah carried herself differently now, with the quiet confidence of a woman who had built a life on her own terms. Her skin was sun-kissed from afternoons spent outdoors, her hands slightly roughened from practical work. You look so Western, her sister Diana commented during preparations for the wedding. Not in a bad way, but different. Delilah smiled. I am different. Wyoming changes a person. And this rancher of yours, he's good to you? Diana asked, concerned despite her happiness about Delilah's engagement. The best of men, Delilah assured her. You'll meet him someday, I hope. Perhaps you and Edward could visit after your wedding tour." The idea of her sophisticated sister and new brother-in-law visiting Clearwater amused Delilah, but she meant the invitation sincerely. Her two worlds might be different, but both were part of her. Diana's wedding was everything Boston society expected: elegant, lavish, perfect in every detail. Delilah stood beside her sister in a gown of pale blue silk, genuinely happy for Diana's joy, while longing for the simplicity that awaited her back in Wyoming. Her mother noticed her distraction during the reception. "You're thinking of him, aren't you? Your Daniel." Delilah nodded. "I miss him. Is that terribly disloyal on Diana's special day?" "Not at all," her mother replied, surprising Delilah with her understanding. "Love doesn't divide our hearts, it expands them." She patted Delilah's hand. "Your father and I would very much like to meet this man who has finally brought you happiness." "You will," Delilah promised. "At our wedding, if you can make the journey." "Wild horses couldn't keep us away," her mother assured her, "though I admit I never imagined my scholarly daughter as a rancher's wife." "Nor did I," Delilah laughed. "Life has a way of surprising us." When June arrived, Delilah was more than ready to return west. She had enjoyed reconnecting with family and friends, but Boston no longer felt like home. The train journey seemed interminable, each mile bringing her closer to Daniel and the life they would build together. Cheyenne's platform was crowded when she arrived, but she spotted Daniel immediately. He stood tall among the other waiting people, his hat in his hands, searching the disembarking passengers with eager eyes. When he saw her, his face broke into a smile that outshone the Wyoming sun. Delilah barely waited for the porter to help her down before she was running to him, propriety forgotten in the joy of reunion. Daniel caught her in his arms, lifting her briefly before setting her gently on her feet. "Welcome home," he whispered against her hair. "Home," Delilah repeated, the word filled with meaning. "Yes, that's exactly right." The journey to Clearwater was filled with Daniel's news. Thomas had grown at least 2 inches. Martha had already begun planning wedding refreshments. The new house on their land was nearly complete. "I hope you'll like it," he said, a rare note of uncertainty in his voice. "It's not grand like the houses in Boston, but there's room to expand as needed." "As needed?" Delilah questioned with a raised eyebrow. Daniel's cheeks reddened slightly. "For a family, I mean, if you want that." "I do," she assured him, her hand finding his. "Very much." Their wedding took place on a perfect July day, with the entire town of Clearwater in attendance. Thomas served as ring-bearer, beaming with importance. The Millers sat in the front row, having become something between family and dear friends to both Delilah and Daniel. Delilah's parents had indeed made the journey west, her father walking her down the aisle of Clearwater's small church. They had arrived a week early, enough time to get to know Daniel and see that their daughter's happiness was genuine and well-founded. As Reverend Halloway pronounced them husband and wife, Delilah thought briefly of Samuel Donovan. In a way, he had brought her to this moment, to this man. His memory would always be part of her story, but it was no longer the story she was living. Daniel kissed her as applause filled the church, his eyes shining with promises more certain than any letter could contain. That evening, he took her to their new home, a sturdy 2-room cabin with a porch that faced the sunset. Inside was simple but comfortable, with furniture Daniel had either made himself or purchased in Cheyenne. "It's perfect," Delilah said, turning in a circle to take it all in. "Absolutely perfect." "There's one more thing," Daniel said, taking her hand and leading her outside. At the edge of their property stood a fence post, not the weathered one from the edge of Clearwater, but a new one, freshly set. Attached to it was a small brass plaque. Delilah leaned closer to read the inscription in the fading light. For Delilah, who waited faithfully. For Daniel, who found her. For the letters that brought them together. July 15th, 1878. Tears filled Delilah's eyes as she traced the words with her fingertips. "Daniel, it's beautiful. I thought we should mark the place," he said, his arm sliding around her waist. "Not to dwell in the past, but to remember how we found each other." As the sun set over their land, Delilah Warren Ross stood with her husband, no longer waiting, but arrived exactly where she was meant to be. The journey had been longer and different than she had imagined when she first came west. But standing here now, she wouldn't change a single step. "No more waiting at fence posts," she murmured, leaning into his embrace. "No," Daniel agreed, kissing her temple. "From now on, we face the horizon together." And they did, through the years that followed, through the growth of their ranch, the birth of their children, the expansion of Clearwater, and the changing of the West itself. Thomas grew to manhood on the Miller farm, eventually attending college in Denver before returning to teach at the school where Delilah had once instructed him. Each year on their anniversary, Delilah and Daniel would stand at that special fence post, watching the sunset together. And sometimes, when the light hit just right, Delilah could almost see the ghost of a younger woman waiting there, not with sadness, but with the certainty that hope, even when it takes unexpected paths, is never wasted.